The bus screeched to a halt at the corner of Jefferson and Main, the brakes groaning as the evening rush poured in. It was one of those early autumn days when the air carried both the chill of approaching winter and the restless energy of the city. The bus was already half full, a mixture of tired workers, students clutching backpacks, and parents trying to keep restless children in check. Nia Carter, a 22-year-old college student, boarded with her usual mix of determination and weariness. She had just left her part-time tutoring job, her laptop tucked carefully in her tote bag, her mind already racing ahead to the midterm papers she still had to write. She scanned the bus quickly. Front rows were open, but the unwritten rule was clear. People who looked like her were expected to move further back. She hated it. It was unspoken, unofficial, but real. Tonight, though, something in her shifted. Maybe it was a long day. Maybe it was the memory of her grandmother's stories about growing up in the South during the Civil Rights era. Maybe it was the way she had overheard her professor earlier that morning dismissing the importance of protest, as if history hadn't been built on it. Whatever it was, Nia decided she was done with rules that told her she was worth less. She chose a seat in the very front, right behind the driver. The bus jerked forward again, and Nia pulled out a small book, hoping to drown in its pages. But it didn't take long for the driver's voice to cut through the hum of the engine. "You'll need to move," he said sharply, glancing at her through the rear-view mirror. Nia froze. She knew what he meant, though he hadn't said it directly. "Excuse me?" she asked, raising her eyes to meet his. "That seat's reserved. You need to sit further back." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to listen, while secretly hanging on every word. Nia's heart raced, but her voice came out steady. "I'm fine right here." The driver's jaw tightened. "Miss, don't make this a problem. Just move to the back." She felt dozens of eyes on her, some curious, some annoyed, some silently urging her comply, so the ride could continue without drama. But something deep in her chest, something stronger than fear, anchored her in place. "No," she said simply. The silence that followed was louder than the bus engine. A woman near the middle muttered under her breath, "Here we go again," while a man in a suit pulled out his phone, pretending to check emails but angling his camera just enough to catch the scene. The driver gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "If you don't move, I'll have to stop this bus and call the police." Nia's hands trembled around her book, but she didn't lower her gaze. She thought about her grandmother, Evelyn, who used to say, "Baby, silence is agreement, and we've been silent too long." So she lifted her chin, "Then call them." A gasp rippled through the passengers. Someone whispered, "She's serious." Another voice, louder this time, muttered, "Just let her sit there, man. It's not that deep." But the driver wasn't backing down. He pulled the bus to the curb, threw it in park, and picked up his radio. "This is Bus 14, Jefferson Line. I've got a situation. Passenger refusing to comply. Requesting police assistance." The weight of those words settled over the bus like a suffocating blanket. Children hushed, mothers shushed them, and a few passengers stared openly at Nia now, as if she had become both hero and criminal in the same breath. Nia could feel her pulse in her throat. She wanted to run, to avoid the storm that was about to break, but her body refused to move. Deep inside, a voice whispered, "If you move now, you'll regret it forever." The driver eyed her through the mirror again. "You happy now? Police are on their way." Nia closed her book, placed it gently in her bag, and folded her hands in her lap. "Yes," she said, her voice firm though her palms were slick with sweat. The bus fell into a tense silence. Outside, cars honked as they swerved around the idling bus. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation, fear, and something else, something unspoken that felt like history about to repeat itself. And then, the first flash of red and blue lights appeared in the distance. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, she's actually going to get arrested." Nia didn't move. The lights grew closer, reflecting off the windows, bouncing across the faces of the passengers. And as the sirens wailed louder, one thought burned in Nia's mind. If I let them drag me off this bus, maybe, just maybe, the world will finally have to look at us. The bus doors hissed open. The cold night air swept in, and the first officer stepped inside. The hook ends there, with tension hanging heavy in the air. The bus door creaked open, letting in the sharp bite of the night air. Two uniformed officers stepped up, their presence heavy, their boots thudding against the metal steps. The taller of the two scanned the rows immediately, his gaze locking onto Nia as if he'd been briefed on exactly where to look. "Evening," the taller officer said, his voice flat but firm. "We got a report of a passenger refusing to comply with bus rules." The driver wasted no time pointing. "That's her. She won't move to the back." The officer turned his full attention to Nia, sizing her up. She sat rigidly, her chin high but her heart hammering so loudly she was sure the entire bus could hear it. "Miss," he said, his tone carrying both authority and a forced patience, "I'm going to need you to stand up and step off this bus." Nia swallowed hard. Her palms pressed against her thighs to stop the trembling. She could feel the weight of every pair of eyes drilling into her, waiting for her next move. "I bought a ticket like everyone else," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I'm not breaking any law. I have the right to sit here." The shorter officer exchanged a glance with his partner, then sighed. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just step off, miss. We'll sort it out outside." But Nia didn't move. Instead, she pulled her tote bag closer, gripping it like armor. From somewhere near the back, a young man's voice rang out. "She's not bothering anybody. Just let her sit." The officers ignored him. The taller officer shifted, his tone sharpening. "If you don't come with us willingly, we'll have no choice but to remove you by force." The word force sent a ripple of unease through the passengers. A child whimpered. An elderly woman muttered a prayer under her breath. And then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, the sound of phone camera recording filled the silence. One passenger, then another, then another. Screens glowed faintly in the dim bus light, capturing every word, every movement. Nia noticed, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she felt a flicker of something stronger than fear. Witnesses. "If you arrest me," she said, her voice louder now, "everyone here will see exactly what's happening. Everyone watching will know." The driver groaned, exasperated. "For God's sake, just move to the back so we can get on with the route." But the moment had already shifted. The murmurs of passengers grew louder, phones held higher. The officers were no longer just dealing with a problem passenger. They were standing under the unblinking gaze of a digital audience. The taller officer stepped forward, hand hovering near his cuffs. "Last chance, miss." Nia's breath caught. She could feel the heat of adrenaline flooding her veins. Every instinct screamed at her to stand up, to leave before things turned ugly. But the words of her grandmother echoed again. "Silence is agreement, and we've been silent too long." She looked the officer straight in the eye. "I'm not moving." The bus erupted, not in chaos, but in sound. Some cheered, some gasped, some begged her to reconsider. But all of it, every whisper and shout, was caught on camera. The shorter officer reached for her arm, and in that instant, a teenage passenger in the aisle shouted, "Don't touch her." The boy couldn't have been more than 16, his voice cracking as he stood, shaking with courage he didn't know he had. The officers froze, caught between escalating and retreating. And then it happened, like a spark leaping from dry wood. The bus filled with chorus of voices, overlapping, rising. "Let her sit. She paid her fare. This is wrong." It was messy, chaotic, but undeniably united. A bus full of strangers, drawn together in defense of one young woman who dared to hold her ground. The taller officer's jaw tightened. He knew the cameras were recording. He knew this wasn't going to stay between these four walls. With a sharp breath, he lowered his hand and stepped back. "Fine," he muttered, "but if this bus doesn't move in the next 2 minutes, we're shutting it down." The driver sputtered. "What? You can't just—" But the officers ignored him, retreating down the steps. The doors hissed shut behind them. For a long, suspended moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the idling engine. Then, slowly, applause broke out. Hesitant at first, then louder, fuller, echoing through the bus until it felt like the walls themselves were vibrating. Nia sat frozen, her face hot, her body trembling. She hadn't moved an inch, but it felt like she had climbed a mountain. The man in the suit, the one who had angled his phone earlier, leaned forward from a few rows back. "That's going viral tonight," he said with a grin. Nia's stomach flipped. Viral? She hadn't even thought about that. She had only thought about not giving in. But now the reality dawned on her. Whatever just happened here wasn't going to stay small. By the time the bus rolled forward again, phones were buzzing. Clips were already being uploaded, captions typed, hashtags added. And as the city blurred past the windows, Nia's world began to change forever. By the time Nia stepped off the bus that night, her phone was vibrating nonstop. At first, she ignored it. She thought it was just her friends checking in, maybe her mother reminding her to lock the doors when she got home. But when she finally unlocked the screen, she froze. Her notifications were flooded, hundreds of messages, mentions, tags. And at the top of her feed was a video. Her video. It was shaky footage, filmed from the back of the bus. Her voice rang out clear and defiant. "I bought a ticket, like everyone else. I'm not breaking any law. I have the right to sit here." And then her final words, louder, echoing over the officer's threats. "I'm not moving." The caption read, "She refused." And we all saw it. The view count ticked upward, so fast it made her dizzy. 10,000, 20, 50. Within hours, it was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, even Facebook. People were stitching it with their own reactions, replaying the tense standoff, adding hashtags. Hashtag, "She didn't move." Hashtag, "Bus stand." Hashtag, "Justice in motion." Some praised her bravery. Others mocked or dismissed her. And beneath every post, the comments warred, strangers debating what she meant, what she represented, and whether her stand was courage or foolishness. Nia sat on the edge of her bed, her phone glowing in her trembling hands. Just that morning, she'd been another anonymous face on public transit, tired after work, hungry, planning leftovers for dinner. Now her face was plastered across millions of screens. Her best friend, Tasha, called almost immediately. "Girl, do you even know what's happening? You're trending. Like, not just here, nationwide. Everyone is talking about you." Nia pressed her palm to her forehead. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't want this. But you did this," Tasha said firmly. "Don't you see? You stood your ground. And now people can't stop watching. This could mean something." But not all the messages were supportive. As the night dragged on, Nia's inbox filled with venom. "Why don't you just follow the rules like everyone else?" Entitled brat. Another attention seeker playing the victim. Some messages went further, darker. Words that made her stomach twist and her hands go cold. She deleted them quickly, but the sting lingered. By morning, the local news had picked up the story. A reporter stood outside the bus terminal, holding a microphone, her voice brisk and polished. Last night, tensions rose on city transit when a young woman refused to give up her seat at the front of the bus. The confrontation with police officers, caught on camera, has now gone viral, sparking nationwide debate. Was it civil disobedience or unnecessary defiance? Nia stared at the screen, her breakfast untouched. They were already framing it, already turning her into something more than she was. A symbol, a headline, a controversy. When she walked outside later that day, the air felt different, charged. Strangers whispered as she passed. Some offered smiles, nods, even quick thank yous. Others scowled, muttered insults just loud enough for her to hear. At the coffee shop, the barista handed her a latte with a shaky smile. No charge, just thank you for what you did. But when she boarded another bus that evening, a man sneered as she sat down. "Here comes a hero," he muttered. "Think you're Rosa Parks or something?" The name hit her like a jolt. Rosa Parks. She had grown up hearing the stories, reading the history books, admiring the quiet courage of a woman who had refused to give up her seat in Montgomery decades ago. But she never imagined anyone would compare her to that legacy, especially not like this, heavy with sarcasm, meant to cut her down. That night, she couldn't sleep. She scrolled endlessly, caught between pride and terror. On one hand, she saw kids in school sharing her video with captions like "Be brave like her." On the other, she saw politicians twisting her actions into talking points, pundits dissecting her choice, strangers posting her photo with insults too cruel to repeat. It was overwhelming, suffocating. She was one woman. She hadn't planned a protest, hadn't gathered a crowd. She had simply refused to move. And yet, somehow, that single moment had ignited something far bigger than herself. By the end of the week, national media vans rolled through her neighborhood. Reporters camped outside her apartment building, waiting for a soundbite. Her neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispering about the girl who was now that bus woman. And then came the knock on her door. When she opened it, two community leaders stood there. One was an older black woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, dressed in a neat blazer. The other was a young activist, barely in his 20s, wearing a hoodie with slogans painted across the front. "We'd like to talk," the woman said, her voice calm but firm. "You've started something whether you meant to or not. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" Nia's breath caught. Until now, she had only been reacting, ducking the cameras, avoiding comments, surviving the noise. But in that moment, she realized the truth. Her choice wasn't just hers anymore. Her stand had become a spark. And sparks, once lit, could either die quietly or grow into a fire that changed everything. For days, Nia tried to hide. She kept her curtains drawn, ignored interview requests, and let calls go unanswered. But the world outside wouldn't let her disappear. Every corner of her city buzzed with her name. Every screen replayed her voice, her refusal, her defiance. And yet, as the days stretched on, something shifted. It wasn't just noise anymore, it was organization. Flyers began appearing on lampposts. "Justice on the bus," rally this Friday. Social media buzzed with hashtags calling for reform. College students planned sit-ins. Churches held prayer vigils in her name. What began as a shaky phone video was morphing into a full-blown movement. Nia sat at her mother's kitchen table, her fingers curled around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. Her mother's voice was soft, but unyielding. "Baby, hiding won't change what's already started. You've been given a platform. Maybe you didn't ask for it, but maybe, just maybe, God put you here for a reason." Nia looked at her mother, eyes stinging. "But what if I'm not strong enough? What if I mess this up?" Her mother reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Courage doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going anyway." That night, Nia lay awake, the glow of her phone lighting the room. She scrolled through messages again, this time slower, more deliberate. For every insult, there were 10 more voices saying, "You gave me hope. Because of you, I'm speaking up at school. My daughter asked me why she can't sit where she wants. I told her, because people like Nia are fighting for her." Something in her cracked open. She had been so focused on the hate, the pressure, the fear. But beneath it all, she saw the truth. People weren't just watching her. They were standing with her. The next morning, she made a decision. The press conference. By Friday, the rally was impossible to ignore. Hundreds of people had gathered outside City Hall, signs raised high. Equal rights, equal seats. Justice can't be ignored. Nia spoke for all of us. News vans lined the streets. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Reporters jostled for position, microphones ready. And at the heart of it all, Nia stood trembling behind a small podium. She had never given a speech before. Public speaking had always terrified her. But as she looked out over the sea of faces, young and old, black, white, Latino, Asian, people of every background, she realized this wasn't about polished words. It was about truth. Her voice shook at first. "I didn't set out to be here. I wasn't trying to start a movement. I was just tired of feeling like my place could always be taken away. Tired being told to move back, sit down, stay quiet." The crowd murmured, the sound swelling with each word. Cameras zoomed closer. But that night, I realized something. If I moved, I wouldn't just be giving up my seat. I'd be giving up my dignity. And I couldn't do it. Not anymore. Her voice steadied now, rising above the noise. They told me to move. But I am here to say we are not moving. Not back. Not down. Not silent. The crowd erupted, a roar of applause and cheers rolling through the streets. Some cried. Others lifted their fists. Strangers hugged each other. For the first time since that night on the bus, Nia didn't feel alone. The pushback. But while the rally swelled with hope, resistance grew just as fierce. That evening, cable news split-screened the event. One commentator praised her courage. Another sneered about entitled youth causing chaos. Online, hashtags doubled both for and against her. And the city's bus authority issued a cold, sterile statement. We are reviewing the incident. While we respect free expression, all passengers are expected to comply with safety instructions. Translation, they weren't on her side. Not yet. Worse still, a counter-protest appeared the very next day. Men in crisp suits stood on courthouse steps, shaking their heads and warning about disorder. Anonymous accounts leaked her address online, filling her inbox with threats so vile she had to shut her phone off. The more she rose, the harder the world tried to drag her down. The breaking point. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Nia walked alone through a quiet park. She needed space to think. But halfway across the bridge, she stopped, gripping the railing as waves of fear crashed over her. What if I can't handle this? She whispered into the wind. What if I'm not enough? Her mind replayed the insults, the threats, the endless scrutiny. She thought of going silent again, disappearing into anonymity, letting the noise fade. It would be so easy. But then she remembered the little girl she'd seen at the rally, holding a sign almost as tall as she was. Because of Nia, I know I matter. Tears blurred her vision. That child wasn't looking for perfection. She was looking for courage. Nia wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and whispered to herself, I can't go back. At that moment, she knew the climax wasn't just a rally. It was a choice she had to make again and again, every single day, to stand, even when it hurt. And she wasn't standing alone anymore. The morning of the city council hearing felt heavier than any morning before. The sky was gray, clouds swollen with unfallen rain, and the streets hummed with nervous anticipation. For days, the newspapers had called it the decision day. The hearing wasn't just about Nia's bus ride anymore. It was about the future of transit policies, civil rights in the city, and whether one voice could force an entire system to bend. As Nia approached the courthouse steps, cameras clicked like 1,000 tiny hammers. Reporters shoved microphones toward her, each one demanding a soundbite. Do you regret what you did? Are you scared? Do you think today will change anything? She didn't answer. Instead, she tightened her grip on the strap of her worn leather bag and climbed the stone steps, her mother's steady presence at her side. A chant swelled from the crowd gathered behind the barricades. Nia! 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 Inside, the council chamber buzzed with tension. Dark wooden benches creaked as people squeezed in shoulder to shoulder. The air smelled faintly of old books and sweat. At the front sat the council, 12 officials in tailored suits, faces fixed in neutral expressions, as if they hadn't already made up their minds. To Nia's right sat her volunteer lawyer, a young black woman named Maya who had stepped forward after the rally. To her left sat her mother, clutching her hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. Across the room, the bus authorities' representatives whispered to each other, sleek briefcases at their feet, smug confidence in their eyes. The gavel struck. This hearing will come to order. The evidence. The first to speak was the bus driver. His voice was flat, rehearsed. I asked her to move for safety reasons. She refused. That's all there is to it. Nia's chest burned as whispers rippled through the crowd. Safety? That was the word they always used, the excuse they always gave. The bus authorities' lawyer leaned into the microphone. This case is not about race. It's about order. If passengers can defy rules whenever they please, chaos follows. We must uphold the law. For a moment, it seemed as if the weight of authority would crush her. Their voices carried polish, experience, power. Hers was just one against many. Then Maya rose. "With respect," she began, her voice sharp as steel, "this case is entirely about race, because the so-called rules are applied selectively. If Nia Johnson had been white, would she have been told to move? The answer, whether this council admits it or not, is no." Gasps filled the chamber. The council chair raised a hand for silence, but the spark had already caught fire. Nia's turn. When Maya finished, all eyes turned to Nia. She hadn't planned to speak. She wasn't trained for this. But as the silence stretched, she felt the weight of every person who had shown up for her, who had lifted signs and lit candles, who had whispered "thank you" in her inbox. She rose slowly, her knees trembling. The microphone loomed before her like a mountain. For a heartbeat, she wanted to run. But then she thought of that little girl with the sign. "Because of Nia, I know I matter." Her voice cracked at first. "I didn't refuse to move because I wanted attention. I refused because I was tired of shrinking." She looked each council member in the eye, one by one. "Tired of being told I don't belong. Tired of being reminded that no matter how quiet I am, no matter how much I follow the rules, there will always be another rule waiting to push me back." That night, I decided no more. A hush blanketed the room. Even the cameras seemed to lean in. "I know what you're thinking," she continued, stronger now. "You're wondering if one person on a bus really matters. But I'm telling you, it does. Because when one of us stands, others stand too. And when we stop moving back, step by step, seat by seat, we all move forward together." Her last words rang out like a hammer on steel. "So no, I don't regret what I did, and I won't apologize for wanting dignity." The storm, the chamber erupted. Some clapped, others jeered. Council members whispered furiously among themselves. The gavel struck again and again, but the noise refused to settle. On live television, pundits argued in real time. One called her a modern Rosa Parks. Another sneered that she was an agitator. Hashtags exploded across the internet, millions weighing in as if they too had been in that chamber. But for Nia, the storm inside quieted. For the first time since the night on the bus, she felt whole. She had spoken her truth, and nothing, not the council, not the bus authority, not even the world, could take it back. The decision, after hours of deliberation behind closed doors, the council filed back into the chamber. The air was thick, every breath heavy with anticipation. The chair cleared his throat. After review, the council has voted to suspend the disciplinary action against Ms. Johnson. Furthermore, we will open an investigation into transit seating policies. The words were careful, bureaucratic. They didn't admit fault. They didn't promise change. But it was a crack in the wall, and for Nia, it was enough to let hope rush through. The crowd erupted again, this time with cheers. Strangers hugged. Reporters ran to the doors to broadcast the news. And at the center of it all, Nia stood trembling, tears streaming down her cheeks, not because the fight was over, but because it had truly begun that night. As she walked out of the courthouse, the chants followed her down the steps. "We won't move back. We won't move back." For the first time, Nia didn't just hear her name. She heard a movement. The morning after the hearing, the city woke to a new rhythm. Newspapers splashed Nia's face across their front pages, her tear-streaked expression frozen beneath headlines like "She refused to move" and "A bus ride that changed the city." Television anchors replayed her words on loop. "I was tired of shrinking." For many, it felt less like a testimony and more like a mirror, reflecting years of silent frustration, unspoken pain, and quiet endurance. But while the media buzzed with excitement, Nia sat on her mother's worn sofa, cradling a mug of tea she hadn't touched. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall. She felt both lighter and heavier at once. Lighter because she had spoken, because she had stood her ground. Heavier because now the world expected more from her, more speeches, more interviews, more strength. Her mother touched her hand. "Baby, you don't have to carry the whole world. You carried yourself, and that was enough." Nia nodded, though deep inside, she knew the world wouldn't let her go back to being just a college student. Community awakening. In the weeks that followed, Something shifted in her city. People who had never spoken up before began to find their voices. At the local high school, students organized a Stand Strong Day, wearing shirts with Nia's quote, "No more shrinking." At the bus stops, passengers began refusing to accept discriminatory treatment, taking out phones to record and share their experiences. The bus authority, overwhelmed by public pressure, quietly pulled down old priority seating signs that had always been used to target people of color. It was subtle, almost unspoken, but the energy in the air was undeniable. A collective refusal to accept the quiet indignities that had long been ignored. Nia started receiving letters, hundreds, then thousands, some from her city, some from across the country, even a few from overseas. A woman from Alabama wrote, "When I saw you stand, I saw my grandmother sitting on a bus in 1955. Thank you for continuing her fight." A teenager from London wrote, "Because of you, I spoke up when I was told to know my place. For the first time, I didn't." Each letter was a reminder. This wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told to move, to shrink, to disappear. Personal costs. But change never comes without cost. While many praised her, others sent hate mail. Envelopes stuffed with cruel words, emails filled with venom, strangers spitting insults when they thought cameras weren't around. Some accused her of exaggerating, of stirring division. Others said she was destroying tradition, making everything about race. One night, she found a spray-painted word across her mother's fence. Troublemaker. She stood frozen, throat tight. Her mother calmly picked up a bucket of water and a rag, scrubbing the letters away as if they were nothing more than dirt. "They can write what they want," she said, "but it won't stick." It was in that moment that Nia realized resilience wasn't about never being afraid. It was about refusing to let fear dictate the final word. New role, new burden. Invitations began pouring in: universities, community organizations, even national conferences. They wanted her to speak, to share her story. Each stage felt terrifying at first, rows of faces staring, waiting for her voice. But every time she told the story, the trembling in her voice grew softer, her words steadier. She wasn't just retelling the bus ride anymore. She was sharing a message. Dignity is not negotiable. Justice doesn't ask permission. And sometimes one act of refusal can start an entire movement. Some nights, she lay awake, wondering if she was ready for this role. She hadn't asked to be a symbol. She hadn't planned to be a leader. But the movement seemed to have chosen her. And slowly, she began to accept that perhaps this was what her life was meant to be. The city responds. Months after the hearing, the city council announced the results of their investigation. The seating policies were officially abolished. New training programs for bus drivers were launched, focused on equity and anti-discrimination. A hotline was created for passengers to report unfair treatment. It wasn't perfect. Racism didn't disappear overnight, but the changes were real, tangible, and undeniable. One afternoon, as Nia boarded a bus, she noticed something different. The signs were gone. The air felt lighter. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, nodded respectfully. Passengers watched her, not with judgment, but with quiet admiration. For the first time, she took a seat near the front, not with defiance, but with peace. The student who needed her. One day, after a speech at a local college, a young woman approached her. She was shy, clutching a notebook to her chest. "Ms. Johnson," she whispered, "I was going to drop out this semester. I didn't think I belonged here. But when I saw you stand up there, I realized I didn't have to shrink anymore either." Tears filled Nia's eyes as she hugged the student. In that moment, she understood what her mother had meant all along. She didn't have to carry the world. She just had to carry herself. And in doing so, she'd given others permission to carry themselves too. Looking ahead, on the anniversary of her bus ride, a candlelight vigil was held downtown. Thousands gathered, holding signs and lights, chanting the same words that had echoed in the courthouse: "We won't move back." Nia stood at the front, candles flickering in the night breeze, faces glowing with hope. She thought about that first night, the harsh command, the humiliation, the trembling fear. And she thought about the girl who had held a sign at the rally. Because of Nia, I know I matter. Now, looking at the sea of candles, she realized it was true. She had changed something. Not everything. Not forever. But enough. Enough to prove that courage, even in the smallest act, could ripple outward until it touched the lives of thousands. And as the crowd chanted together, she whispered a vow to herself. This is only the beginning. The years that followed Nia's refusal to move were not always easy, but they were filled with undeniable change. The city, once reluctant to confront its divisions, now carried her story as part of its identity. Schools taught about her in social justice classes. Civic leaders referenced her name in speeches, and community centers hung her photo alongside other icons of courage. But Nia never let it make her untouchable. She remained grounded, still the same girl who had once clutched her backpack nervously on a city bus. She walked the same streets, rode the same buses, ate at the same corner diners. The difference was that now, when people saw her, they didn't see just a passenger. They saw a reminder of what was possible. The ripple through generations. 10 years later, a mural appeared downtown. Bright colors stretched across a brick wall, depicting Nia sitting defiantly on that bus, her gaze unshaken. Beneath her image were the words, "Because she stood, we no longer sit in silence." Children passing by would tug at their parents' hands, asking, "Who is she?" And parents would tell them about the night a young woman said no, when everyone expected her to say yes. The mural wasn't just art. It was a lesson, a story passed on to those who hadn't been alive to witness it firsthand. At schools, teachers invited Nia to speak during assemblies. She would look out at rows of eager faces, some too young to fully understand the depth of her story, yet old enough to feel the weight of her conviction. She always ended the talks the same way. You don't have to be older, richer, or stronger to make a difference. You just have to decide that today, right now, you're done shrinking. Her words became a mantra for students who, in their own ways, were fighting battles against bullying, against injustice, against silence, personal evolution. While the public saw her as a symbol, Nia had her private struggles. Some nights, she replayed the bus ride in her mind, asking herself, what if I had stayed silent? What if I had moved? But the answer always came clear. She hadn't. And because she hadn't, countless others no longer felt they had to. Nia also found love along the way. Someone who didn't fall in love with the activist, but with a woman who loved poetry, late-night coffee, and slow walks through the park. Together, they built a quiet life, one where she could recharge away from the noise of the public stage. Her partner often reminded her, you don't have to be brave every day, just enough days to change the world. And that was enough. The movement grows. Her story sparked other acts of resistance across the country. In other cities, when passengers were told to know their place, they remembered Nia and chose instead to resist. Students led peaceful walkouts. Communities organized stand-strong bus rides, filling entire routes with protesters sitting proudly in seats that had once been forbidden. Journalists began to refer to it as the Nia effect, not because she alone had ended injustice, far from it, but because her refusal had ignited something bigger than herself. One historian put it best during a documentary interview. Rosa Parks lit a fire in 1955. Nia Johnson rekindled it in a generation that thought it had gone cold. A return to the bus. One crisp autumn afternoon, years after the night that changed everything, Nia boarded a bus again. This time, the bus was nearly empty. She walked slowly down the aisle, her footsteps echoing faintly. She sat in the exact same seat she had once been ordered to leave. The seat felt the same, but she didn't. She placed her hand gently on the window, staring at her reflection. It wasn't just a bus anymore. It was a symbol, a battlefield, a victory. And as she sat there, she whispered softly to herself, I didn't move, and because of that, the world did. The final rally. On the 20th anniversary of her refusal, the city held a massive rally in her honor. Tens of thousands gathered in the central square, holding candles, signs, and banners. Some read, "No more shrinking." Others simply had her name. As she stepped onto stage, The crowd erupted. The noise shook the air, but Nia raised her hands gently, calling for silence. She looked out over the crowd, people of every age, race, and background, and for a moment, tears blurred her vision. When I was told to move that night, I was scared. Scared of losing, scared of punishment, scared of standing alone. But I learned something. Fear doesn't disappear. You carry it with you. What matters is whether you let fear move you or whether you stay seated in your truth. The crowd erupted again, chants rising like thunder. Stay seated in your truth. Stay seated in your truth. Her legacy. Nia knew the movement would continue long after her. She was just one thread in a long tapestry of courage that stretched back generations. She thought of Rosa Parks, of her grandmother who had marched in the streets, of her mother scrubbing hate from the fence. And now, she thought of the children who would one day tell their grandchildren about the girl on the bus who wouldn't move. Her act of defiance wasn't about her name in history books. It was about planting seeds of courage in soil that would grow long after she was gone. And that was legacy enough. Closing reflection. That night, as the rally lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, Nia sat quietly on the stage, staring out at the empty square. Her life had changed, her city had changed, but the work was far from over. Injustice still existed, silence still suffocated too many. But she had learned something vital. It only took one act of courage to spark 1,000 more. She whispered into the night air, almost like a prayer, "May we never shrink again." And with that, she stood, not to leave, not to retreat, but to continue walking into the future she had helped shape.